we need we need this resurrection to occur at the kind of historical collective level. And so for me, this was just a profound calling of like, this is what, it is. I mean, it's right. That's what God does in the prophetic tradition is he finds people to kind of speak to a new way of being in the world. There's a new way to be human.
Oh, right. Switchfoot, baby. Got you.
And so anyway, what I gleaned from all this was basically, so there's this moment in the poem where, there's this resurrection of the divine, and there's this grand kaleidoscopic eye that, it's a mystical vision of this new God concept and all this stuff. And so then I thought, yeah, okay, well, this is what people do. Or what we can do, and this is what God is calling for in this historical moment, let's say. And the way to do that is through putting out new words, new ideas, new symbols, new images into the culture, right? Vervaeke talks about stealing the culture. We've got to steal the culture, but we need a new God concept. And I know that there are different ways this can land for people. It can sound like I'm saying that people need to create God in a different way. You can interpret it that way, but I think you can also very much interpret it as God is calling people to transform people's understanding of God as well. And so there is a way of understanding this whole sort of evolution as something in that way. So that was when I realized the importance that art can have, the divine utilization of the aesthetic. That aesthetics are important, not as an end unto themselves, but you could say in service to the good and the true, right? And so so that was what then precipitated me reaching out to do a master's degree at Yale Divinity School, which I found a program called Religion and the Arts there. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to be perfect. And I looked at the faculty, and people like Christian Wyman and others were there. So it seemed like this was a place where I could pursue that angle to things. So I did wind up going to the Divinity School in the end. It just took this long period of figuring out what exactly it is that I was actually supposed to do as part of this picture. And I started out thinking, I had a different role to play, and now ended with a very different one. So, well, yeah, that's, that's basically the end of that story.
Because you said the aesthetic, something like pointing to the true and the good, but I mean, that's a beautiful story. It has its versions of tragedy, has its versions of redemption, and now plotting that path. I mean, we've kind of, you've been, I don't know if the word's gracious, but you've like stayed in the Christian frame pretty, but I know, listening to a few of your videos and obviously the conversations you had with Paul and with Jordan, I'm going to tell you how I experienced, we'll jump to those now. And I want to tell you how I experienced that.
Sure.
In contrast and what I think I'm coming to understand as a metamodern Christianity versus metamodern religion. So, so the way it hits me is at this point, I think you are seeing use the word divine then as and it's more of a universal truth, like you would integrating like all the major religions or something. How can we get past the modern and then the postmodern that then collapses on itself to this thing? Is that accurate with everybody? Or
yeah, I mean, so you're asking like just briefly like what I would see as a metamodern Christianity or metamodern religion?
Religion. Yeah, that and so does that kind of describe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's how would I say? What you said, right? That there's this element of the other traditions playing a role here. That there's some aspects of the different traditions that are speaking to something true and universal as well. And then there are also elements of those traditions that are just speaking to something maybe more narrow, local, cultural, parochial.
Like how to transcend that. It feels like from what I gathered from the little bit that I did, your project feels like, how do we transcend like that whole level? Like we're at this space where, well, your truth is your truth, and then that all collapses.
Yeah.
And then how do we get to that higher form of consciousness type thing? And I guess I would, obviously, as someone who claims Christ and the Christian story as truth, and we can get into all those words too, but like, I'm trying to make sure that I understand that is kind of a little bit of the vision of a metamodern religion.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's all about being clear really what we mean by this, because there are all sorts of ways that people can try to gesture towards like some kind of universal, syncretistic religious project or something, and those can be terrible too, right? There's all sorts of new age elements of like, oh, we can just take from any tradition we want and make some kind of Franken religion or something. So that's one way that can happen. So it's a very specific mode, I think, of thinking in terms of the different stages of the different cultural epochs, the different insights that are brought to bear from different. Here's a way of thinking about it: the structures of thinking, right? So each religion has content, but each religion can also be thought of as exhibiting different structures in different contexts. For example, right? If you look at the form that let's just call it like traditional devotional Christianity takes, and you look at how like traditional devotional Buddhism takes, there's a lot of structural similarities there, right? What do I mean by that, right? Like there's a sense of there's some kind of revered text, and that these texts are attributing or articulating a certain kind of traditional wisdom that's been handed down, that goes back, that has a sort of ultimate value and ultimate reality to it, and that there's often a sense that there are supernatural phenomena, miracles, and non-naturalistic things that happen. Ritual is very important, etc. Okay, just use some examples, right? And you can find forms of that with traditional Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, etc. But then if you think about, like, let's say modern Christianity, well, what does that look like? Well, there you've got, Christians, yes, taking very seriously and caring a lot about their tradition and their symbols, but also maybe saying, well, a lot of that's symbolic and metaphorical. And now we have science and we have a better sense of how all that stuff plays out. And so these scriptures fulfill a different role than all of that, right? And we shouldn't read Genesis as like science. And similarly, like Buddhists, I mean, think of like what the kind of stuff that the Dalai Lama, has written about and stuff, of like bringing in neuroscience and explicitly saying in some cases, like, yeah, if it was shown that reincarnation wasn't real and that was proven to be the case, then like, yeah, we shouldn't believe it. Similarly, like maybe Reformed Judaism and stuff like that, where you got this very modern sensibility that's engaging with the past, but from a sense of, yeah, but not all of that should be taken quote unquote literally, et cetera, right? These are structural parallels that, even though the content is very different, the structures are actually very similar. And so if you think of the modern, the pre-modern, the modern, the postmodern as structures, a way of building a bubble or a worldview, right? Like what we were talking about earlier, of like inhabiting that world space, then you can see that the content can be different, but it's the structure that is very similar. And so what a metamodern religion approach to religion looks like, one of the aspects of it is looking at religion specifically through those different structures and trying to understand that potentially as a developmental progression in a way that avoids that postmodern collapse you're talking about. Because the postmoderns will look at all these different worldviews and they'll say, hey, look, like all these people just believe different things, and you believe this, you believe that. And yeah, maybe there's pre-moderns and maybe there's moderns, but who's to say, because it's all relative. The metamodern then comes around and says, no, these are structures of thought, actually, and you can show in a meaningful way that one leads into the next and builds upon the previous one. And if you can show that, then they're not just relative and arbitrary, they actually